Have you ever had that incredibly frustrating experience where you are perfectly following along with something really complex in another language?
Oh, like watching a fast-paced foreign movie without subtitles?
Yeah, exactly. Or, maybe eavesdropping on a conversation at a cafe, and you understand every single nuance. You feel like an absolute linguistic
Oh,
genius.
right. You are totally with it.
But then someone turns to you and asks a really simple question in that same language, and you completely freeze.
Oh, it is the worst. It's this universal, uniquely agonizing thing. You have this massive vocabulary floating around in your subconscious, but the second you try to speak, it just vanishes.
It vanishes. It
Makes
feels
little-
like your brain suddenly severs the connection to your vocal cords.
I mean, it really feels like a fundamental betrayal by your own brain.
Totally. Why does our mind feel like an absolute supercomputer when we are passively listening, but then it immediately downgrades to a rusty, broken typewriter the second we actually try to speak?
That is the million-dollar question, right? That massive canyon between passive understanding and active fluency.
And that canyon is exactly our focus for today's deep dive. We are unpacking some really fascinating source material centered around a practical story of an English learner named Lina.
Yeah, and Lina's story is just the perfect lens for this because she is dealing with this exact plateau.
She is completely stuck.
Completely stuck, despite years of intense study. And she has hit a wall that many of you listening have probably hit in your own learning journeys.
Whether it's a spoken language or, a programming language or even just public speaking. So we tear into why this mental block happens and, more importantly, how to actually break through it.
Let's start by looking at Lina's initial state, because I think a lot of you are going to see yourselves in her frustration.
For sure. The source notes that Lina has been learning English for a long time. I mean, she is far from a beginner.
Right. She can comfortably watch movies. She reads articles without constantly reaching for a dictionary.
Exactly. She can follow native-level conversations effortlessly. She has put the hours in.
Her comprehension is incredibly high. Like, the linguistic database in her head is fully stocked.
Fully stocked. But when it's her turn to speak, everything just falls apart. She pauses. She desperately searches for words she knows.
The source even mentions she sometimes forgets the most basic sentence structures.
Yeah, and she falls into this classic, really demoralizing internal monologue. She just keeps telling herself, I understand English, but I just cannot speak it.
Which sounds like an intelligence issue, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a cognitive failure.
It does. But think about a huge music fan who has studied music theory for like a decade. They can look at complex sheet music and hear the entire symphony perfectly in their head.
Oh, yeah. They know the tempo, the dynamics, the key changes.
Exactly. But they have literally never sat down and pressed a key on a piano in their entire life.
Right.
So is the problem that this person doesn't understand music, or is the problem just that they are trying to play an instrument they have never actually touched?
That is such a great analogy. It cuts straight to the core of what psychologists call the illusion of competence.
The illusion of competence. Break that down for us.
Well, we frequently mistake our ability to recognize a pattern for our ability to actually produce that pattern.
Oh, okay.
Reading sheet music or passively listening to a language is deeply cognitive. Your brain is decoding signals. But physically striking the piano keys or, articulating foreign syllables with your mouth, that is overwhelmingly physical.
So Lina is confusing a total lack of physical motor skill practice with a lack of intellectual understanding.
Exactly. And that physical aspect brings us to a massive paradigm shift in the source material.
Right, because Lina is so frustrated that she decides to completely overhaul her approach. She joins a practical language workshop and meets a coach named David.
And David watches her struggle to speak for a few minutes, but he doesn't correct her grammar.
Nope. He doesn't hand her a new list of vocabulary flashcards either. He just smiles and drops this bombshell that completely redefines fluency for her.
He tells her, your problem is not your brain, it's your mouth.
It's your mouth, which is just, it's a profoundly disruptive way to view learning.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because we are so heavily conditioned to view language as an academic pursuit.
Oh, I actually have to push back on David here a bit because this contradicts literally everything we are taught in the traditional education system.
How so?
From day one, school teaches us that language is purely cognitive. You memorize vocabulary lists. You take written tests on grammar rules.
Right, analyzing the present perfect versus the past continuous.
Exactly. It's treated like a math equation where you just plug in the right variables. If my brain already knows the rules and holds the vocabulary, shouldn't my mouth just automatically follow
You'd
orders?
think so, right? Like, why wouldn't the hardware just run the software?
Exactly.
Well, it's because the hardware is vastly more complicated than we give it credit for. When David says speaking is a physical skill, he is talking about the sheer biomechanical complexity of human speech.
The gymnastics your face has to perform.
Right. Your tongue, your lips, your jaw, your vocal cords, your diaphragm, they all require these incredibly complex split-second movements to produce the specific sounds and rhythms of a new language.
And your native language relies on heavily worn motor pathways, right?
Exactly. Trying to speak a new language is like asking a right-handed tennis player to suddenly play an entire match with their left hand.
Oh, wow.
The brain knows the rules of tennis, obviously, but the left arm simply does not have the neuromuscular coordination to execute the swing.
So it is quite literally a biological difference in how the brain operates. It makes so much sense. I always feel like my brain is gaslighting me when I can understand a Spanish podcast perfectly, but I can't even order a coffee.
Well, you're actually using entirely different neural networks for those two things.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. Passive comprehension relies heavily on Wernicke's area in the brain, which processes language input. But speech production, that requires Broca's area and the motor cortex to send thousands of microcommands down to your face and throat.
So David is basically validating Lina's intellect.
Right. He's telling her that her cognitive database is totally full, but she just hasn't spent any time training her motor cortex to fire those specific sequences.
Because knowing the acoustic theory of how a French R sounds is completely divorced from the physical act of making your tongue vibrate that way in real time.
Exactly. Under the pressure of an actual conversation, theory goes out the window.
Okay, so once Lina accepts this, that she's not failing an intelligence test, but she's just lacking physical conditioning, Coach David gives her a new prescription.
He tells her, don't study more, speak more.
Which sounds simple, but he lays out what is essentially a 4-step physical workout routine for her facial muscles. Let's look at how he constructs this, because it bypasses all those cognitive traps we just talked about.
Step 1 is incredibly straightforward. He starts her off by having her read out loud for 5 to 10 minutes every single day.
But wait, if I am just reading words off a page, I'm not really generating my own thoughts. How does that help me speak spontaneously later?
Removing the need to think is actually the entire point of that first exercise.
Really?
Yeah. When you try to speak a new language, generating the thought, translating the vocabulary, applying the grammar, and moving your mouth, it all happens simultaneously. It's a massive cognitive load.
Oh, so by reading out loud, the words and grammar are already provided for you.
Exactly. You completely remove the cognitive burden of invention, and that frees up 100% of your brain's bandwidth to focus purely on the physical articulation of the syllables.
Oh, that makes sense. You are isolating the muscle group, just like isolating a bicep curl at the gym.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
But reading out loud only gets the physical muscles moving.
Right. Surely that just makes you sound like a robotic textbook. You're just pronouncing isolated words.
How does David get her to sound like an actual human being with rhythm?
That brings us to step 2, a technique called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah. It involves listening to native audio, like a podcast or an audiobook, and repeating the sentences immediately after hearing them. You are almost talking over the speaker.
Wow, that sounds intense. It is, but it's a brilliant mechanism because it trains the ear and the mouth in tandem. You are forced to mimic the cadence, the intonation, and the speed of a native speaker.
So you stop learning isolated words and start feeling the actual musicality and flow of the language.
Exactly. Okay, so she's reading out loud to isolate the muscles, and she's shadowing to find the rhythm. But she still has to eventually generate her own thoughts.
Right, which leads to step 3. David tells her to start narrating her day out loud, even if she is completely alone in her apartment.
I love this step. It bridges that gap towards spontaneous thought, but without the crushing social pressure of someone staring at you, waiting for you to finish your sentence.
Yeah, talking to an empty room is way less intimidating. But then we hit the final part of David's routine, step 4. And I'm going to stop you right here because I violently reject this premise.
Uh-oh. Let me guess. The recording.
Yes. He tells her she has to record her own voice and listen back to it. I mean, I would rather chew glass than listen to a recording of my own voice in my native language. let alone stumbling through a language I'm bad at.
It is brutal, I know.
Why is leaning into that extreme, visceral cringe actually necessary for this to work?
Because the cringe you feel is exactly where the learning happens. David warns her it will be incredibly uncomfortable.
Understatement of the year.
Well, we avoid recording ourselves because we prefer the idealized, flawless version of how we sound in our own heads, right?
Right.
But when you hit play on that recording, you activate the auditory feedback loop. You are suddenly confronted with the objective, brutal reality of your physical execution.
Oh, man. So you hear the exact canyon between what your supercomputer brain wanted to output and what your broken typewriter mouth actually produced.
Precisely. You hear every clumsy transition, every vowel you swallowed, every unnatural pause.
It sounds like torture.
But from a neurological standpoint, it is essential. Your brain needs that objective auditory feedback to realize, oh, the motor command I sent to the tongue did not produce the sound I wanted.
So it uses that awkwardness to calibrate and adjust for the next attempt.
Yes, you cannot fix a flaw in your physical form if you refuse to look at the game tape. Elite athletes watch footage of themselves constantly, right?
Yeah.
Anyone trying to build physical fluency has to do the same.
Okay, that makes sense. Having this workout plan is one thing, but actually putting the reps in is where most of us fail. Let's look at how Lina executes this routine, because the tools she chooses seem totally counterintuitive to me.
The timeline in the source is really interesting here.
Yeah, on day one, she grabs a book called Short Stories in English for Beginners, and later she moves to Learn English Through Stories. 16 stories to improve your English grammar and English vocabulary.
She also adds in habits from Effortless English. Learn to speak English like a native, which is huge on repetition and listening.
Right. But wait, if we establish that Lina already has high comprehension, like she can watch complex movies, why on earth is she reading beginner books? Isn't she massively regressing?
It looks like a regression if you are still viewing language as an intellectual pursuit. But under the physical training paradigm, it makes perfect sense.
How so?
Imagine you walk into a gym to learn a highly complex Olympic weightlifting move, like a barbell snatch. You might be incredibly strong, but you've never done this specific lift.
Right. You wouldn't load the barbell with 300 pounds on your first day.
Exactly. You start with a hollow PVC pipe.
Because if you try to lift heavy while learning a complex movement, your form collapses entirely.
Yes. The beginner short stories are the linguistic equivalent of that PVC pipe. They use basic vocabulary and very straightforward linear sentence structures.
Oh, which keeps the mental weight extremely light.
Precisely. Her brain never has to stop and struggle to comprehend what is happening in the plot, which allows her to dedicate all of her energy to how her mouth is physically moving around those words.
If she tried reading a dense textbook out loud, she would be dragged right back into her own head, overanalyzing the grammar.
And her physical form would completely fall apart. She'd be stumbling over every word.
Keep the mental weight light so you can perfect the physical form. That is brilliant. And we actually see the biological adaptation happen on her timeline.
The source notes that the first week feels incredibly strange and awkward.
But by week 2, this massive shift occurs. Her mouth starts moving faster, she stops less. There is this beautiful breakthrough moment detailed in the text where she is just making coffee one morning.
And she starts doing her solo narration exercise.
Yeah, she says to herself, today I will go to work early. I have a meeting at 10. After that, I want to finish my project. She pauses and she smiles because for the first time, it actually feels effortless.
We can point directly to the biology of what is happening in her brain during that kitchen scene. She is experiencing myelination.
Myelination. Break that down for us.
Okay, so every time Lina practices reading out loud or shadowing, a specific neural circuit fires in her brain, sending a signal down to her vocal cords and facial muscles.
Okay, tracking with you.
When you repeat a physical action consistently, your nervous system responds by wrapping those specific neural pathways in a fatty insulating substance called myelin.
Interesting.
The thicker that myelin sheath gets around the nerve, the faster and more efficiently the electrical signal travels.
Oh, it's like upgrading from a dial-up internet connection to fiber optics.
That is the exact mechanism of muscle memory. The awkwardness she felt in week 1 was just the slow, uninsulated firing of new neural pathways.
But by week 2, she had laid down enough myelin through daily repetition that the signals were traveling at lightning speed.
Right. She didn't have to consciously translate her thoughts anymore. The physical execution became automatic. It's biology, not just trying harder.
Okay, so she's laid down that myelin while making coffee and reading beginner stories, but eventually she has to test this out in the real world.
Right, the ultimate stress test.
Weeks pass. She keeps up this daily practice, and she finally returns to a group conversation at the language workshop. She opens her mouth and speaks. And the source is very careful to highlight a specific detail here. She does not speak flawlessly,
No, she still makes mistakes.
but she speaks clearly, naturally, and crucially without stopping every 2 seconds to desperately search for words.
And Coach David watches this and tells her, your brain always knew English. Now your mouth is learning too.
She bridged the gap.
She connected the high-capacity storage of Wernicke's area with the physical output machinery of Broca's area.
Afterwards, she writes in her notebook, "Today, I spoke more easily. I didn't stop too much. I felt confident." She realized that fluency isn't some mystical gift for outgoing people. It's a mechanical byproduct of practice.
But there's a critical mindset shift she maintained during all this. The source is, she doesn't try to be perfect. She just tries to be consistent.
Why is surrendering the need to be perfect, actually, the secret weapon here? I mean, traditional schooling penalizes every single imperfection.
Because perfectionism is the ultimate cognitive trap. It physically paralyzes you. When you demand perfection in a spoken conversation, your brain acts like a hyper-aggressive internal editor.
Oh, I know that editor very well.
Right. Every time you are about to speak, the editor slams the brakes and shouts, "Wait, are you sure that is the correct preposition? Did you use the right verb tense?"
And that intense internal editing is what causes those long, agonizing physical pauses, paralysis by analysis.
Exactly. It shatters the physical rhythm of communication. By giving up the need to be perfect, you essentially fire that internal editor.
You just let the physical muscle memory run its course.
You will inevitably say things wrong, but you will maintain the fluid exchange of ideas.
Mhm.
Over time, as those neural pathways strengthen, the grammatical accuracy naturally catches up to the speed.
But you can never achieve fluidity if you are constantly hitting the emergency brake to check your grammar.
Right, you have to be willing to play a few wrong notes on the piano to keep the momentum of the song going.
Lina felt proud, not because her grammar was flawless, but because she kept the rhythm going. She shifted her identity from a student who studies rules to an athlete who trains a physical skill.
It's so empowering. If you are listening to this right now and wondering why your Spanish hasn't improved despite hours on an app, or why you freeze during public speaking, look at Lina's approach.
It wasn't about adding hours of grueling study. It was about radically changing how she spent 15 minutes of her day, swapping passive absorption for active physical repetition.
Exactly.
So if we synthesize everything we have extracted from Lina's journey today, the core message is incredibly liberating. If you understand a subject, a language, or a concept perfectly, but you struggle to articulate it out loud, cut yourself some slack.
Your brain already possesses significantly more knowledge than you are giving it credit for.
The massive canyon you are staring down is not a lack of intelligence. It is purely a lack of physical neuromuscular conditioning. It's a hardware issue, not a software issue.
Do not wait until you feel intellectually ready or grammatically perfect to start speaking. Just start putting the physical reps in.
Read a simple story out loud. Shadow a native speaker on a podcast. Talk to your coffee maker about your plans for the day. Confront the cringe of your own recorded voice.
Train your facial muscles the exact same way you would train for a marathon. It will always feel clumsy before it feels effortless.
Because that awkwardness is just the feeling of your nervous system building new pathways. Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you mulling over today. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about foreign languages. But if speaking a language, something society universally views as a marker of pure intellectual prowess, is actually just a physical muscle memory waiting to be developed, what other massive intellectual struggles or mental blocks in your life are actually just physical skills disguised as cognitive ones?
That is a fascinating question.
Maybe that supercomputer brain of yours is doing absolutely fine and you just need to start hammering away at that broken typewriter until the keys finally loosen up. We will catch you on the next deep dive.